Hi, I'm Heidi Ragno, and this is the History of Forensic Science, and brought to you by Experiments from Experience. So this is the introduction that I always use for forensic science, so this is hopefully helpful for you. So here we go. Before the 17th century, typically what has happened in ancient times, you could imagine, is most of the time when a crime had occurred, there would have been a confrontation by the accuser. So something happened to someone and they would go and approach the person and maybe call out who they think it was. So let's say, for example, somebody stole your horse. You would go out and find the person. You would go and actually somehow figure out who it was or who you thought it was. And if this was brought to trial, you can think back to the time of like the Salem witch trials. Basically, what happened was either the person would be tortured to confession, and then in that case they would be found guilty. If the person was put through all these tests and trials, if they actually were able to resist the pain, they would be found innocent. But most of the time, they were put through some crazy torturous situations where it was pretty much impossible to be innocent. So I think a great example of this is the Salem witch trials, and I do have a lesson specifically about the Salem witch trials. But before 17th century, the question is in forensics, has justice been served? And I think we can agree that probably in many cases, especially for those who were in positions that did not have power. Maybe if you were kind of lower down on in the system, you were going to be found guilty no matter what. So there really wasn't a lot of actual evidence or proof to prosecute someone. And so basically, forensic science is actually the application of science to the court of law. So that is what forensics is. And criminalistics is the idea of collecting evidence and analyzing physical evidence. It has taken a long time to get here. So in the types of science that we have, we would say forensic science is a newer field. It hasn't really been around that long, but there are some examples of times in history when we have seen it be around. So the early use of forensics, for example, in 3rd century China, this is a crazy story because you can imagine this is a long time ago in history. But a coroner who is basically like what the medical examiner would be today. So the coroner is the person who would have collected the body and processed the body. The coroner solved this case. So a woman was suspected of murdering her husband and then burning the body. So she had claimed that he had died in the fire and it was accidental death. If he had died in the fire and it was accidental, he would have been alive at the time of the fire. So in order to test this and to try to actually prove the innocence or guilt. Basically, what the coroner did was they actually wanted to see if a pig cadaver would have had the ashes in the mouth if they were actually deceased before or if they died during the fire. So typically, if you're alive during the fire, you're going to be breathing in all of that soot. You're going to find that in the lungs and in the ashes in the mouth. And so when the coroner had done this experiment, he brought the evidence from what had happened with the cadaver. He brought this to the woman, said, this is actually what we found. And when they confronted the woman with the evidence, the woman confessed. So this case never went to trial. We never actually had to, they never actually had to prove this out on the witness stand like in crime shows today. It was simply a matter of once they had the physical evidence and they presented it to the person who was trying to claim their innocence, she pretty much folded and confessed right then and there. So this is one of the early examples of how forensic science can solve a crime. Then we get into some more modern history times. So 1600s, we have the beginning of fingerprint characteristics. So we have a professor of anatomy in Italy who is starting to notice that we have fingerprints. He didn't yet understand their application for forensics, but this is still a really big advancement in seeing that we have different fingerprints and everyone's fingerprints are unique. But in 1775, I think 1700s, you can imagine one of the big causes or ways of death would have been poison. So it was very easy to buy and purchase poisons. Arsenic was found in rat poison, so you could easily just go to the store, buy whatever you wanted, and you could pretty much poison someone. And get away with it because there was not really a good detection for it. So in 1775, the Swedish chemist was able to actually devise the first test for detecting arsenic in corpses, which was huge because then you could actually, at their time of death, you could say that they did die from this. So this is sort of an advancement in forensic pathology, which is a very big advancement in the time. By the 1800s, we have the invention of the light microscope. In 1839, the first detection, a microscopic detection of sperm, which is very important when you think of cases of rape, adultery, things like that. Then we have, in 1800s, we also have more advancements in the field of chemistry, so we can see and detect a little bit more with arsenic. Matthew Orfila is now 1814. He publishes the first basically the whole treatise on how to detect different poisons and drugs in the body. So he is considered to be the father of forensic toxicology. This is huge in this field. And this is an important time because before this time, a lot of people could get away with poisoning their neighbor, their spouse, whoever, and they would have gotten away with it. It was really, really hard to pinpoint. Once the field of toxicology picks up, though, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do the test on the corpse so you can determine who and if the person was poisoned. So then we get into the story of James Marsh. So he is a Scottish chemist. In 1839, he is actually the first scientist to testify on a criminal trial. So what he does is he does the test of arsenic on the body. He tests the arsenic. He finds there is arsenic in the victim. When the case goes to trial and they're trying to convict the person who is, being accused of the crime, he is actually called to testify as an expert witness. And this is the beginning of the expert witnesses as we know it now in the court system. So if a scientist does do their testing back in the lab, they can then be called in trial and they can serve as an expert witness, which they're going to explain to the jury what the test is that they did, what they found, and what they think the results mean. And that is the beginning of being able to use forensic science in this way that we use today. So it's a big field in advancement. 1863, we have the first presumptive test for blood. Presumptive is very simple. Presumptive just means ruling out other substances. So the first presumptive blood test means that you can actually rule out that this is not ketchup, this is not lipstick, this substance that you're finding at the crime scene actually is blood. That's really important because now, again, that's more evidence. By the 1850s, 1860s, we have photography, and so there's improved record keeping, where if someone is processing a crime scene, they're going to take better notes, they're going to take better records, and have a better system for that. By the 1879, we have a Bertillon measurement system. So Alphonse Bertillon is an anthropologist, and he is studying different characteristics of the body. He is the first one that decides that we really do need some kind of mugshot. But this is before there's really photography and it's not really done perfectly. So he comes up with a system which we call the Bertillon system, also known as anthropometry. And this is where he is going to come up with the body measurement systems. So he is considered to be the father of the mugshot. What he does is he comes up with systems such as the length of the face, the head circumference, the width of the ear, the length of the ear, the length of the fingers, the length of your forearm, your height, and you put all of these measurements together and you come up with a unique identifier for each person, which does work for quite some time. So they do use this in the systems and when they're booking people into prison. Eventually the system does fall away because it is eventually replaced, of course, with fingerprinting, which is a much more accurate system. But this is the beginning of really trying to have a good record keeping system in the prisons. So now when you look at this, what does this make you think of? And hopefully maybe you've experienced one of these stories or these videos, you've seen this before. Hopefully this picture, when you're thinking of this makes you think of Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock Holmes is actually a huge part of forensic science. And so Sherlock Holmes stories are fictional. This is a fictional character created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The first book he published was A Study in Scarlet in 1887. The reason this is so important, though, is that today, if I asked you why you like forensics, you'll tell me all about the movies or podcasts or TV shows that you watch. Back in the day, in the 1800s, their form of entertainment was not TV, but it was potentially reading magazines and books. So this was a new field of book. This was a different type of story. All of the Sherlock Holmes stories had mysteries that were going to be solved. Sherlock Holmes was the detective that would solve the mystery, and he actually would embed all of these really cool new modern forensic techniques into his stories, even though they were all fictional. But it still got the mind thinking. It got people thinking. It got people really excited about this field, much in the way that you like forensics because of the TV shows you've seen. People would read these stories and they got really excited about this field. So this really popularized the idea of using the scientific method in solving crimes rather than the old, accuse, are you guilty, innocent kind of antiquated system. So this is said to be the beginning of the real kind of modern forensics. Sherlock Holmes stories really got us into serology, which is blood typing. He really got into fingerprinting, firearms, documents, and all of the good feeling at the end when the criminal is caught. And all of that fiction at least got people thinking about this is possible if we actually could use these studies in this way. So forensic science really got going from the public perspective because of Sherlock Holmes stories. So then we continue into the late 1800s. Around the time of Sherlock Holmes stories being published, we actually have Francis Henry Galton. He is the first one not to notice fingerprints, but he's the first one to realize we should classify them and we can use these for identifying people. So this is now, again, beginning of using fingerprints in forensic science. Then we have Hans Gross, who is a prosecutor. He is actually creating this book published called Criminal Investigation. He's talking about the benefits of science in forensics investigations. So it's all kind of coming together. By 1901, we have the ABO blood typing system. So you can actually not only just test if the blood is blood, but now you're going to test, is it A blood, B, what is the group? That's very important because now you can actually test that back to say the person that you might think is the perpetrator, and hopefully you can actually use that to maybe in a conviction. By 1910, we're looking at question documents, so things like handwriting, analysis, things like that. Edmund Locard is huge. He is one of the first real people to come up with this idea of forensic science. He created the Locard's exchange principle, and he was the one that opened the very, very first crime laboratory, which happened to be in France. And Locard's exchange principle is very simple to understand. It's basically how we know forensics today, but what he said was that whenever a crime occurs, there will be an exchange. So he always would say that at the crime scene, you have an exchange between the victim and the suspect, and whatever they're leaving behind is the physical evidence. And by looking through that physical evidence, you can find evidence of the people who have been there. We get more into microscopy, and by the early 2000s, we now have had ancient documents that have been identified, which is really amazing when you think of going back to ancient crimes. By 1984, we have the first DNA profiling test, and that is solving a mystery, solving a really big crime that occurred in England at the time. And this is a huge advancement. And now by the 1980s, we would say forensic science has been developed. We are now in the field of forensics. So history of crime labs in the United States, 1923 is the very first crime lab opened here. 1932, we have the FBI is finally opened. And in 1981, the FBI opens the Forensic Science Research and Training Center, which takes us to today, which is now forensics has become a really big field. A lot of people want to study, and there's a lot of support and programs for people to study this. We have a whole list of forensic crime labs, which are now, of course, in operation today, and they support a lot of our forensic investigations in all these different departments. And of course, abroad, there are many different crime labs as well. We say Scotland Yard because that was sort of like the beginning. So England and Britain is sort of ahead of us here in the United States, but in general, there's a lot of crime labs. A lot of countries are really working through this. And so the goal of forensic science is to examine physical evidence collected, to provide expert testimony and testify as expert witnesses. Next time, we're going to look at why forensic science and why this will be helpful for us in the future. And there's lots and lots more of all these cases that we will be examining. So I hope you come back and look at the other videos to follow. Thank you. Have a great day.